Hello, Baker Econ students. Hard to believe it's already 4 weeks done and we only have 2 weeks left, so just keep plugging along. This week we continue on with the macroeconomic topics. We're going to look at chapter 28 and 29, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview. This reading can be a little bit more technical reading, so just go slowly with it and just kind of look at the different graphs and the examples as you proceed along. But what I strongly suggest is just, write notes to the side, engage in what I call active reading, and then that will help with the comprehension of the material. So to start off with, we look at some of the things in chapter going back to 29 and looking at aggregate supply and aggregate demand. Before, we were looking at market supply and demand. That was much different. Now we're looking at aggregate demand, aggregate supply. And we're doing this on the entire economy. So we look at aggregate demand. We're looking at a relative price level and different levels of GDP along that horizontal axis. So the textbook authors start off with the concept of aggregate supply. And again, knowing, that in a given time period, there's going to be limitations to how much we can produce. We have available technology, resources. But as the textbook points out, if you look at page 753, there's, different reasons why this aggregate supply curve would shift. And some of those can be potential GDP changes. So as we improve in our technology output in people, we can shift that curve outward. But something as example as the money wage rate changes, the money prices of other resources change, that may shift the curve in or out. So all of a sudden there's a huge increase in cost. Suppliers would not be able to pass that on. We'd probably see a shift in aggregate supply. So as you're reading through these chapters, a lot of it's going to be dealing with changes in aggregate demand or aggregate supply and the dynamics that are occurring in the business cycle. So this is just something that we see that happens. And there are different events in our economy that can cause these things to happen. But again, the idea of the fiscal policy we talked about, like the taxes and monetary policy with the Federal Reserve, they're really trying to balance these things out. That is with unemployment, inflation, GDP. As we look at our economy right now, we're trying to stay on a steady pace, and hopefully we'll stay that way for a while. But there are no guarantees. But we have relatively low unemployment. GDP is growing about a 2% rate, and so far, inflation is staying in check. So that's really good news. So hopefully those things will continue. Just want to point out some other things, from the aggregate demand side. You could say, what does shifts in aggregate demand curve? If we look at that in our textbook, they give us some examples there on page 758. So it talks about expectation about the future, people optimistic about the market, the economy. You'd probably see the aggregate demand curve shift out too. Fiscal policy, monetary policy that we've talked about. We have expansionary fiscal policy, that is that you lower taxes or you increase government spending. Contractionary, you do the opposite. You decrease government spending and you would increase taxes. Of course, monetary policy that we talked a lot about last week. If I lower interest rates, we expect aggregate demand curve to shift out. If I raise interest rates, that should start to shift it back in. And then just finally, the state of the world economy, because we are a global economy now, that any impacts on the global economy, like we saw after the subprime crisis, that can definitely impact demand for that country's goods. So, all right, let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, I just want to wrap up in chapter 29. It talks a little bit about the idea of recessionary gap or inflationary gap. Inflationary would be we'd be exceeding beyond what we can potentially do with output. So that's just going to push up price levels. Recessionary gap, you're looking at that, hey, we're not quite there yet. So what do we need to do to get to full employment? And lastly, it talks about demand pull. Inflation, demand pull would be that you're at potential output and aggregate demand keeps shifting out. So all you're really doing is increasing the price level. Cost push, that's probably the worst one because that's, dealing with the supply side. So you get the double whammy. You're getting inflation and also, the fact that costs are going up at an extreme rate too. So that's something we probably want to avoid. So to wrap up with chapter 30, you're going to get into the aggregate expenditure multiplier. We've already talked about aggregate expenditures approach and C plus I plus G plus net exports. But now what you're going to look at specifically is like the consumption function. And then you're going to start to look at the idea of the multipliers. So this is going to help you understand graphically this idea, like the multiplier. Very simply, the formula is 1 on the numerator over in the denominator, 1 minus some marginal propensity to consume. So if you had, like, everybody spends 90 cents out of every dollar they receive in disposable income, well, that'd be 1 over 1 minus 0.90 or 1 over 0.10, and that would give you a multiplier of 10. So the idea in theory is that if you would change any one of these things of the multiplier, let's say that consumption shifts out, or that the government spends $100 million stimulus package. Well, if I took that $100 million and multiplied by 10, I could get to $1 billion change in GDP. So it's all about these gradual shifts that are happening. And if you ever hear about, like, multiplier effects on local economies, say there's an Air Force base next to a town where I grew up in Warrensburg when I went to graduate school. They had Whiteman Air Force Base, and they said that Whiteman Air Force Base had about a $10 million multiplier impact on the town of Warrensburg. If you were taken away, it would decrease that much economic activity in the town by $10 million. So it's real. But we're just looking at a global, not global, but within an economy, what is that impact to the GDP? So you're going to learn a little bit about some of the economists. You'll see John Maynard Keynes there, and he was a big proponent of spending and what we'd say Keynesian economics. The problem with Keynes is he had a hard time putting it in mathematically, and that's why he wasn't taken as seriously in the economics profession. So, but as you have your readings this week, if you come across questions for your homework problems, do email me. Just try to email me early in the week so I can get back to you and respond in time. Jump into the forum discussion early. I just encourage you to truly use an article that is a current event. I really no more than a month old when you're posting these things, because I want to make sure we're tying it to our current economy. We're looking at different things you can discuss this week. So otherwise, have a great week, and I look forward to talking to you online. Take care.